Hi, everyone. So, welcome to the Dear Poet Project of 2020. For those of you who don't know, this is an opportunity to read some work of contemporary poets and then respond to the poems that you read, respond directly to the authors of those poems in a letter. This is a yearly event that the National Poetry Organization puts on for National Poetry Month, which is April. So it's a really cool opportunity to do a deep dive into some new poetry and also have an opportunity to speak directly to the author and share your emotions, your feedback, your responses, and ask them questions, which is really cool. So, a little bit about myself. My name is Emma Pampinen. I am a teacher at Brighton High School in Boston, Massachusetts. And today I'm going to be presenting a poem by Raquel Saras Rivera. So, Salas Rivera was born in Puerto Rico, but lived their life both in the US and Puerto Rico. As you can see, received education from both the US and Puerto Rico, and actually is currently in Puerto Rico as the independent publisher La Impresora's first poet in residence. So, some themes in the writing of Raquel Saras Rivera is the experience of being a migrant to the United States or being like an other in the United States as someone not from the United States, the colonial status of Puerto Rico, and then also identifying as a queer Puerto Rican. So, the poem that I'm going to read is called Notas sobre las temporadas. This is the poem in Spanish, and I encourage you to read it and listen to the poet read it in Spanish. I'm going to read it in English. Notes on the seasons. In Spanish, we don't naturally occur. The seasons differentiate us from natural people. When there are no seasons, let's say, when we are a Caribbean country, better yet, when we are a territory, we aren't allowed to use the X, except for the word xylophone. Because who uses a xylophone and who wants us? Every time you think these questions aren't the same, you recognize that you never met me, despite the I've seen you before and somewhere. If I'm going to explore my nationality, I have to be recognizable. This is what everyone knows. In fact, if I'm not recognizable, it's as if I had no nation. I wrote the following in a letter to the lions of the Maguaya Zoo. I know that right now you are lions, and you've spent a lot of time in the heat. But when you become snakes, no fence will be able to contain you. They'll have to put you in a glass cage. They'll call this cage a fish tank. They'll decorate the cage with rocks. You'll no longer be able to roar. But don't worry. When you become spiders, you'll be able to leave the fish tank. You'll climb up to the roof. Maybe it'll take you many weeks to find a window, but in the interim, you'll eat mosquitoes since these are abundant despite the aromatic candles. I wrote them this letter because I know what it's like to wait for transmogrification. I wrote them this letter because I know what it's like to wait for transmogrification in captivity. Outside of the fish tank, there is a room. Outside of the room, there is a zoo. Outside of the zoo, there is a hometown. Outside of the hometown, there is a colony. Outside of the colony, there is an empire. Outside of the empire, there is the king of seasons. If you kill the king, you kill the game. I thought that there was a lot of in this poem, a lot of ideas, a lot of things to look at. I'm going to point out a couple of lines that stuck out to me, including this line: if I'm going to explore my nationality, I have to be recognizable. This is what everyone knows. In fact, if I'm not recognizable, it's as if I had no nation. I thought this was a really interesting line because it challenges the idea of demonstrating one's culture in an acceptable way, like that challenges that the idea that there's just one way to identify someone from a different culture. So if an individual chooses to demonstrate their nationality in the way that's not the one that everyone knows, it's like that they are not able to do it in the same way. And I thought that was a really interesting point. I also really enjoyed this line, or this letter, I should say, to the lions that the poet wrote. The poet says, I know that right now you are lions. So we have this image of something strong and powerful. But then the lions shift into snakes and then into spiders. And I thought this was a really interesting idea, an interesting image to show what it's like to adapt to the circumstances, to ultimately reach your escape. So it seems as though the poet is saying it's a process, right? They say, don't worry, you'll become a snake. Don't worry, you'll become a spider. Like, this is how it happens. And you shift and you move from maybe something strong and powerful and loud to something still strong and powerful but smaller and sneakier, and this is how you make your escape. Other ideas that I thought of that I thought were worth considering, that the author, I think, touches on is the way that language can reflect power structures, right? So they mention that there's no seasons in Spanish, or that the letter X is only used in certain ways. So it's creating conflict between English and Spanish, and maybe bringing up some power dynamic there. Also, this idea of transmogrification or transformation, is it coming from a self-motivated place or one that is demanded by other people? So when is that transformation healthy, maybe? And then the last line, this idea of the game is up. What is the game? Like, that would be an interesting question to ask. Is there an idea of colonialism there, as Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States? Who is the king that she's referring to? It seems like there's a lot of different ways that the author is bringing up power, in and challenging the notion of power. So there's so much that they wrote in this poem that is worth considering and thinking about and writing about. And I hope that you take the opportunity to read this poem again, listen to it being read by the author, and then maybe choosing it as a poem to respond to and write a letter to, because I would love to hear their responses. Thanks for listening. Bye.